Snow had been falling since before sunrise, a slow, deliberate curtain that softened every edge of the mountain and turned the pines into tall, white ghosts. From my window, Alder Hill looked suspended in time, silent except for the wind breathing against the glass. I had been cataloging a set of Venetian glass birds for the museum, fragile, iridescent things that caught the light, like trapped rain when the low hum of an engine disturbed the quiet. I frowned. Few people came up this road in winter. Delivery trucks never risked it when the path was frozen. The sound grew louder, tires grinding against gravel and snow, until finally a silver SUV appeared at the bend. Even through the haze I recognized it. My chest tightened before my mind had time to prepare. Evan. I hadn't seen him in nearly a year. Not since the argument in Denver about his failed firm and the money he swore he'd pay back but never did. Still, when he stepped out of the car, snow clinging to his coat, I felt something in me waver, an old reflex carved by years of forgiveness. He didn't knock. He never did. The door opened with a gust of icy air and the scent of city smoke. "Mom," he said, smiling as if we'd just spoken yesterday. "You look good." The lie sat politely between us. I gestured for him to come in. Inside, the house smelled of cedar and old books. Evan brushed the snow from his sleeves, looking around as though the place had changed without his permission. His eyes landed on the marble bust near the staircase, the one his father sculpted before he died. "Still keeping him here," he muttered. "I like the company," I said. He gave a small laugh that didn't sound like one. "You always did." There was silence. He followed me into the sitting room where the fire burned low and the glass figurines sparkled in their cases. I poured tea, though neither of us drank it. He sat at the edge of the sofa, restless, tapping his fingers on his knee. "I need your help," he said finally. The words hit a familiar nerve. They were the same words he had used before every disaster of his adult life. "I'm in a tight spot," he continued, voice softer now. "A short-term issue. I just need a bit of cash flow to keep things steady. This project, this one's real, Mom. It's the future of housing design. I stopped him with a look. "How much?" $300,000. He said it fast, like ripping off a bandage. I leaned back, studying him. His suit was expensive but wrinkled. The collar of his shirt was damp with sweat despite the cold. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for his cup. "That's not a small favor." "It's a loan," he said quickly. "I'll pay you back. I swear." "You've said that before." His jaw tightened. "Why do you always assume I'll fail?" "I don't assume," I said quietly. "I remember." He flinched as if the words had weight. The clock ticked in the silence that followed. For a moment he seemed to shrink, shoulders sagging, eyes wet with something like shame. Then, as if a switch flipped, the softness vanished. "Do you have any idea what it's like to live under your shadow?" he snapped. "Everyone thinks I've had everything handed to me, but you keep the leash tight enough that I can choke on it." I took a slow breath. "Evan, I never wanted to choke you. I wanted to teach you how to stand." He laughed bitterly. "Spare me the lecture. I'm drowning, Mom. If you can spend millions preserving dusty glass birds, you can save your own son. That collection keeps the museum alive. It feeds 20 staff members. It's not just mine." He stood abruptly, pacing in front of the fire. "You don't understand. This isn't just money. It's survival." Something in his tone shifted too desperate, too dark. I felt a ripple of unease. "Are you in danger?" He stopped pacing. "You always think the worst." "That's not an answer." He looked at me, eyes colder than I remembered. "If you won't help me, I'll find another way. But don't call me when you realize what that means." Before I could reply, he was gone, coat whipping behind him like a ghost in the draft. The door slammed, and the silence that followed was heavier than the storm outside. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty space where he'd stood, the faint smell of cologne still lingering. Then I noticed something near the hearth, a small, white envelope half hidden beneath the rug. I picked it up, expecting a receipt or a business card. The label on the corner read, "Boulder Chemical Supply." Beneath it, printed in bold, "Potassium cyanide, handle with caution." For a moment the room seemed to tilt. I set the envelope down carefully, as though it might explode. The fire cracked behind me, its warmth suddenly unbearable. Outside, the snow had stopped, but the world felt smaller. The air inside the house too thin to breathe. I looked toward the window where his car had vanished down the hill and whispered his name, though I wasn't sure if it was in fear or disbelief. The envelope gleamed faintly in the firelight, white and silent, like a warning. I carried the envelope to the study, as if I were handling a live coal. The desk lamp threw a careful circle of light over the wood. I slid on a pair of cotton gloves from the museum drawer, the same gloves I use when I handle porcelain from the 18th century. The paper felt new and cheap. There was an invoice tucked inside, a date from last week, a partial address in Boulder, and a tiny dusting of pale crystals along the glue seam that caught the light like frost. I closed the flap and placed the envelope in a shallow archival box, then wrote a label in my sharp librarian hand. Do not touch. The house went quiet in a way I do not trust. The radiator sighed. The fire settled. Somewhere in the gallery wing, the old clock gave one tired chime. I turned on the monitors for the exterior cameras. The snow on the driveway glowed silver under the security lights, clean except for the tracks Evan had left. On the roadside camera, a second set of impressions ran along the passenger side of the SUV, light and careful, like a dancer stepping out and back in again. I rewound the footage until the image blurred. The passenger door opened. Someone leaned out, the bare suggestion of hair curling over a collar, a hand adjusting a mirror, the faintest smudge of red when the light hit glass. Then the door closed and the shape was gone. I told myself it could have been nothing, a shadow, the reflection of my own worry. Still, I found myself listening for sounds that did not belong to me. I walked through the rooms with the soft step that comes from years of living alone. The museum cases held their breath. The Venetian birds, the Roman glass, the blue and white plates, all where they should be. In the kitchen, I smelled something sweet that did not belong to my house. Not cinnamon, not vanilla, something more bitter, like almond left on a hot plate too long. The trash bin was empty. I keep a tidy kitchen. On the counter, an old porcelain set waited under a dust cover. I had not used those cups since Arthur died. They are twins, white and thin as eggshells, with a ring of cobalt near the lip. I had polished them yesterday when the new intern asked to photograph them for the catalog. I lifted the cover. One cup was missing. I checked the sink, then the drying rack, then the cabinet. The second cup was not there. I stood very still. I tried to recall if I had moved it, if the intern had moved it, if anything about this small detail had a harmless explanation. The house hummed with the sound of the generator coming on. The storm had brushed the lines again. The kitchen light flickered and steadied. Somewhere far down the hill a fox barked, a little sawed-off cry that sounds like a child in a dream. My phone vibrated on the counter. An unknown number. I let it ring once, then again, then answered. Mrs. Harvey, a woman said. Her voice was warm and bright, the kind of voice that smiles even when it lies. I am a great admirer of your museum. Do you accept private visits in the morning? I would love to bring you a small gift from the city, a special roast, very smooth, perfect for cold air. I am closed this week, I said. What a pity, she answered. Perhaps another morning then. It would be an honor to share a cup. The line went quiet. I checked the call log. No name, no location. My hands were steady when I set the phone down. Inside, something old and bruised folded in on itself. I walked back to the study and wrote a sentence in my black notebook. Do not drink what is offered. Under it, another line. If the danger wears a friendly voice, it is still danger. For a time, I busied myself with the work that has always saved me. I wrapped a cracked Delft tile with care. I made notes on provenance for a carved walnut box. The movements were familiar enough to calm my pulse. They did not quiet my mind. It kept flicking back to Evan, at 8 years old in the summer light. Pockets full of marbles, eyes bright with theories about how the world works. It flicked to Evan at 17, brilliant and impatient, selling a bronze paperweight to a boy from school and lying about it when I found the empty space in the case. It flicked to Evan at 30, charming and tired, promising that the next plan would fix the last one. You love your child as he is, not as you write him in your head. Arthur told me that when he was dying. Love will not save him from himself, he said, but it may keep him from believing he is alone. I believed both parts. I still do. It does not mean I must open my door to every storm he brings with him. I turned off the study lamp and walked down the corridor to the small bedroom I keep off the gallery. I like to sleep with the heart of the house around me. The glass cases give back a faint glow at night, as if the objects know they are being watched and approve. I set the archival box with the envelope on the top shelf of the safe in the closet. I pressed my thumb to the biometric lock until the light went green. Then I sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the generator hum and the wind comb the pines. Footsteps on snow carry in strange ways. You can hear them without hearing them. It is a pressure in the air, a pause in the rhythm of the night. I stood and parted the curtain. A figure moved beyond the gate, a dark comma against the pale road. The figure waited a long minute, then a pair of headlights turned the bend and the shape dissolved into the trees. When the lights faded, the road went back to being a ribbon of silence. I slept badly, if it can be called sleep. Every time the house shifted, I woke. Around 3, I thought I heard a door click. I walked through the rooms with a flashlight and a museum guard's patience. No broken locks, no open windows, no strange smell, except that sweetness from the kitchen that would not leave. I found the missing porcelain cup at last. It was in the dishwasher, clean, turned upside down, as if someone had wanted it to look innocently used. I remembered the last time I ran that machine, and could not place it. I washed the cup again by hand, set it beside its twin, and closed the cabinet. Dawn came thin and blue. Snow dusted the sill like sifted flour. I made tea and carried it to the window seat that looks down the hill. The SUV tracks from yesterday had blurred under new powder, but I could still see the deeper cuts at the curve where Evan had braked too hard. My phone lit up on the cushion. A message from Evan, coming by at 10. There is someone I want you to meet. She wants to make peace. We will bring coffee. The words glowed on the screen, simple and polite, the kind that make a person feel foolish for being afraid. I read them twice, then a third time. I set the phone face down on the cushion and watched the trees lift their white shoulders against the light. In the study, the safe sat heavy and patient behind the closet wall. In the kitchen, the cups waited like two pale eyes. At 9, I unlocked the side gate for the delivery of a painting that was due next week, then locked it again. I checked the batteries in the camera over the garden door. I walked to the pantry and took down the box of sealed water bottles we keep for winter storms. I placed one on the table and told myself to drink from it and nothing else. A childish measure, a necessary one. At 9:30, the wind dropped. At 9:40, the sun pushed a thin coin of light through the clouds. At 9:50, I heard the first grind of tires on the hill and the small answering sound my heart made in my chest. I smoothed the tablecloth, picked up my notebook, and wrote one more line. Keep your eyes open. Keep your hands steady. Remember what you already know. Then I closed the book and went to open the door. The tires stopped outside the porch at 10 sharp, just as the message had promised. The house lights trembled on the walls. The sound of doors opening drifted through the cold. I watched from the window until their shapes appeared between the trees. Evan walked ahead, his stride quick, head down. Beside him, a woman followed in a cream-colored coat that glowed against the snow. She was carrying a silver thermos wrapped in a scarf. When I opened the door, the smell of perfume reached me first, something floral with a metallic trace underneath. "Mom," Evan said, cheerful now, too cheerful. "This is Adriana Vale." She smiled, hand extended, nails perfect and pale. "Mrs. Harvey, I've heard so much about you. Evan told me your home is a museum. He was right, it's extraordinary." "Thank you," I said, stepping aside. "Come in, you must be freezing." Inside, the house absorbed them like new furniture. Adriana looked everywhere, her eyes skimming the surfaces as if measuring their worth. She moved with rehearsed grace. I offered to take her coat, but she declined, keeping the silver thermos close to her chest. "I thought we'd bring coffee," she said. "Something special. I blend my own beans, it's a hobby. I promise you've never tasted anything like it." The words made me think of the call the previous night, the bright voice offering a similar gift. Evan settled on the sofa, talking fast about his new partner, the project, the chance to expand sustainably. His words folded one into another until they meant nothing at all. I watched Adriana in the corner of my eye. She poured the dark liquid into 2 porcelain cups, the same design I had found cleaned in the dishwasher, and stirred delicately. The scent that filled the room was sharp, sweet, and faintly wrong. She turned and offered 1 cup to me with both hands. "I hope you like vanilla. Evan said, "It's your favorite." He looked up at me quickly, too quickly, as if to gauge my reaction. I smiled the way one smiles at a polite stranger. "You remembered," I said, and accepted the cup. The porcelain was warm. I noticed she kept the second one in her own hands but did not sip. We sat. Evan talked again, louder this time. Adriana listened, smiling in the right places, nodding when he mentioned numbers. I lowered my cup, pretending to cool it with a breath, and set it on the table. "You've done well for yourself," I said to her. "I try," she answered lightly. "I believe in new beginnings." "New beginnings require endings first," I said. "That's what makes them possible." Our eyes met. Her smile faltered for the smallest second. "Perhaps you'll give us a tour," she said. "Evan says your collection is priceless." Evan shifted in his seat. "Adriana, maybe later. Mom's busy." She laughed softly. "I'm just curious." I picked up my cup again, lifted it halfway, then paused. "Would you like to trade?" Her brows lifted. "Trade?" "For luck," I said, smiling. "It's an old superstition in the mountains. 2 cups switched means good fortune for the guests." Evan laughed nervously. "Mom, seriously." But I had already set my cup before her and reached for hers. The motion was easy, unremarkable. She hesitated, then forced another smile. "Of course." She slid hers toward me. The exchange took a heartbeat. I brought the cup to my lips, let the rim touch my mouth, and pretended to sip. The taste that met my tongue was faintly chemical, almond and smoke. I set it down again. Adriana talked a moment longer, but her sentences began to thin, her words breaking apart. Her hand trembled. The cup rattled on its saucer. Evan leaned forward. "Honey, what's wrong?" Her face had gone pale under the perfect makeup. She coughed once, twice, then bent over, clutching her throat. The sound was wet and terrible. I stood, my own heartbeat suddenly very calm. "Call an ambulance," I said. Evan fumbled for his phone. The call took too long. Adriana's coughing turned to gasps. She was trying to speak, but could not. The thermos rolled from her lap and hit the rug, spilling a thin, dark trail that hissed where it touched the wool. By the time the paramedics came, the snow had started again. They lifted her gently, her breath shallow, her eyes wide and unfocused. One of them asked what she had consumed. I said coffee, blended privately by a guest. They took the thermos too. Evan rode with them, still pale, still silent. Before the ambulance doors closed, he looked back at me. His face held nothing, no fear, no guilt, only confusion at how the story had turned on him. When the red lights disappeared down the hill, I went back inside. The house smelled of scorched sugar and metal. The 2 cups sat side by side on the table, one upright, one overturned, their rims touching like conspirators. I picked up my notebook and wrote the last line of the day. "Someone tried to kill me. She failed." Then I closed the book, locked the door, and waited for morning. Morning brought a brittle brightness that made the snow outside look like salt scattered over glass. The house still carried the aftertaste of last night's fear. The air smelled faintly of cold metal and smoke from the dying fire. At 9:40, the rumble of tires began again. By the time I reached the door, Evan was already stepping out of the driver's seat, brushing snow from his coat. Behind him, a woman unfolded herself from the passenger side, graceful as if the cold obeyed her. "Mom," Evan called. His voice was lighter now, practiced. "I brought someone I'd like you to meet." The woman extended a gloved hand. "Adriana Vale, it's such an honor, Mrs. Harvey." Her accent floated somewhere between California and Italy, polished, smooth by money. I welcomed them in. The scent of her perfume entered first expensive, heavy, sweet enough to hide something sharper underneath. She carried a slim paper bag tied with silk ribbon. "A small thank you for having us," she said. "A bottle of Montefiore dessert wine. It's rare, better shared with family." The label glittered faintly as she held it toward the light. Evan smiled, too bright, too rehearsed. He had used that same tone when he was a boy, explaining broken glass in the garden. We moved to the dining room. Adriana's eyes touched everything, the carved chairs, the silver clock, the portraits along the wall, as if she were reading the price tags instead of the stories. She placed the bottle on the table and unwrapped it carefully, admiring her reflection in the glass. "I thought we could try it with coffee," she said. "It gives the flavor a velvet finish." Coffee again. The coincidence pressed a chill into my spine. I smiled anyway. That sounds lovely. Evan talked while she prepared the tray. He described a new venture in modular architecture, the kind that promised to revolutionize eco-living. His hands moved as he spoke, but his eyes darted between Adriana and me, measuring reactions. I answered in polite fragments. The smell rising from the pot was not coffee's usual warmth. It was darker, tinged with burnt sugar and almonds. Adriana poured 2 cups. The porcelain gleamed white against the black liquid. She offered one to me, the other she kept. Evan reached for neither. "To family," she said, lifting her cup slightly. I mirrored her. The rim brushed my lips. I tasted nothing because I did not drink. Across the table, she hesitated, then sipped. A heartbeat later, her expression shifted, tiny and precise, a dancer missing a step. The clock on the wall ticked louder. She spoke, but the words broke apart. Evan turned, startled. "Adriana?" Her fingers loosened. The cup clattered, spilling dark rings across the linen. She coughed once, then again, sharp and deep. The sound bounced off the wooden panels. Her eyes widened, watering. "Hospital," she gasped. "Something's wrong." Evan caught her arm, panic replacing pretense. I was already at the phone. The dispatcher's voice felt miles away. I gave the address, the symptoms, the word poisoning that I did not yet say aloud. By the time the sirens echoed up the hill, Adriana's face had gone gray. She was still breathing when they carried her out, the blanket swallowing her elegance. Evan climbed into the ambulance beside her, his eyes flicking once toward me, confused, frightened, and, under that, a glint of accusation. When they were gone, the house seemed to exhale. The spilled coffee steamed faintly on the tablecloth. The smell of almonds thickened until I had to open a window. I looked at the 2 cups, one empty, one half full, their rims nearly touching. I washed both under running water until the scent faded, then wrapped them in linen and locked them in a cabinet. Outside, the snow began again, soft and endless. I sat in the chair where Adriana had been and let the cold air from the open window fill the room. My hands were steady, my heartbeat was not. Something inside me whispered that the story was only beginning, and that the next time Evan returned to Alder Hill, he would not come alone in spirit. The hospital smelled of bleach and winter. Fluorescent lights hummed in the ceiling, as if they were trying to remember the sun. I followed the paramedics down a corridor where the linoleum had been polished into a mirror that refused to show anything clearly. They wheeled Adriana through a pair of sliding doors that closed with a quiet thud. Evan stood beside me, swallowing hard, his hands opening and closing like someone practicing for impact. A nurse asked what Adriana had consumed. I repeated what I had told the dispatcher. Coffee brought by a guest, a dessert wine added in a small amount. She wrote quickly, eyes moving, voice calm in the way that calms other people. A doctor arrived with a clipped introduction and a stethoscope that swung like a pendulum. He listened, nodded, and disappeared behind the curtain. Evan spoke without looking at me. "You did not have to let her drink it." "I did not ask her to," I said. "She poured for both of us." He rubbed his forehead and stared at the floor. The black scuff on the linoleum earned all of his attention, as if an answer were hidden there. Minutes stretched, the corridor filled with small sounds that do not belong to one person. Wheels, whispered instructions, a distant cough. I sat in a chair that punished the spine and read the posters on the wall as if they were scripture. Dehydration symptoms, stroke warning signs, a chart of lungs, pale and delicate like wings. I thought of the 2 porcelain cups breathing steam on my table, and felt a shiver that did not come from the cold. The curtain opened. The doctor stepped out, mask lowered. He spoke to us both. "She is stable. We are treating her symptoms and monitoring her levels. We found signs consistent with exposure to a cyanide compound. We need to gather as much detail as possible about what she ingested and when. We are contacting authorities." The word hovered in the air. Evan made a small sound that could have been relief or fear. He nodded too quickly and said he understood. The doctor moved on, and the curtain closed again. A police officer arrived first, then another. The older one introduced herself, then asked if we would answer a few questions. The tone was gentle, a surface of water over stone. She asked who prepared the drinks, where they were poured, what was added, who else had access to the kitchen, whether any recent conflicts might matter. Evan responded, eager now, describing a visit meant to make peace, a generous bottle of wine, a coffee ritual his partner loved. He kept his voice careful when he spoke about my house. He said it was a museum. He said I was particular. He did not say that particular can mean controlling if you need it to. The younger officer asked me if I had tasted the drink. I told the truth. I had lifted it. I had not swallowed. I had noticed a scent that did not belong to coffee. I had suggested we trade cups. I said this lightly, and left out the part where the trade had felt like stepping from a cliff onto invisible ground. The older officer wrote in her notebook for a long time. Another hour passed, then 2. I phoned the museum to tell them I would not be in. I told the front desk to keep the doors closed and the interns busy. I told no one anything else. In the 3rd hour, a detective arrived. He wore a dark suit and a tired expression that could have been carved there. He spoke to the officers, then to the doctor, then to us. Ms. Vale is likely the victim of deliberate poisoning, he said. The hospital will retain samples. We will need to secure the location where the beverage was prepared and consumed. For everyone's safety, we will also need to collect any containers and cups that were involved. Evan nodded so quickly his hair fell into his eyes. He pushed it back and said he wanted to help in any way he could. He took out his phone and offered to show messages that proved the visit was friendly. The detective said they could review that later. He turned to me and asked if I consented to a search of my kitchen and dining room. I said yes. He gave a small, not quite smile that meant he had expected a different answer. A nurse called Evan's name. He vanished behind the curtain. I remained in the corridor, alone again with the hum and the posters. I thought of the envelope in my safe and of the phone call in the night, the warm voice promising a special roast. I thought of the faint red on the passenger mirror in the camera footage. There is a rhythm to careful work. You collect pieces, you do not polish them into a story until they agree to fit. Evan reappeared with a paper visitor badge and a new tremor in his hands. He was allowed to sit with Adriana. He did not invite me. I did not insist. The detective finished a round of calls and told me his team would be at my house within the hour. He asked if there was anyone else who could have entered the property. I said no. He asked about service staff and deliveries. I listed names and dates. He asked if I had recently purchased any chemicals. I looked at his face when he asked. I said no. When I stepped outside, the wind had risen. The sky carried that flat shine it gets before more weather. My breath left a small cloud that drifted away like a thought I was not ready to keep. The detective offered a ride to the house. I declined and chose to drive behind the patrol car, the hospital shrinking in the mirror until it became a bright rectangle on the hill. The driveway at Alder Hill was unmarked, clean slate after the morning plow. The patrol car stopped short of the porch and 2 officers got out, careful with the snow, careful with their eyes. Inside, the house woke at our entrance like a cat that chooses to notice you. The detective stood in the dining room and looked at the table as if it had already spoken. I unlocked the cabinet and handed over the 2 porcelain cups wrapped in linen. The officer sealed them in bags with the patience of a ritual. Another officer photographed the tablecloth and the rug before folding them into evidence. They collected the bottle and the thermos, and the small metal spoon that had fallen and rolled beneath the chair. They moved through the kitchen, the way water moves through a field, slow and thorough, touching everything it needed to touch. The detective's tone remained even. We will also need to look through adjacent rooms and common areas. If we find anything that may be relevant, we will let you know immediately. I nodded and folded my arms to keep from rubbing warmth into my hands. Cold travels differently when your house is full of strangers. They searched for a long time. I stood in the doorway and watched the snow climb the windows and listened to one officer make polite conversation about the pines and the drive and the way mountain light lies in winter. I answered where it was kind to answer and kept the rest to myself. Eventually, the detective returned from the gallery wing. He had an evidence bag in his hand and a question in his face. "We found a small vial in the guest bathroom upstairs," he said. "It was behind the medicine cabinet. There is a handwritten sheet with dosage notes beside it. I would like you to take a look." For a moment, I did not move. The room seemed to lean very slightly, as if the house had shifted its weight. Then I followed him up the stairs. The guest bathroom smelled faintly of peppermint from the soap I keep in a blue dish. The cabinet door hung open. On the shelf sat a glass vial with a transparent residue at the lip. Beside it, a folded page in black ink. The letters looked neat and disciplined in the precise way my handwriting has always been. I stood very still. I heard my voice come out calm and far away. That is not mine. The detective did not argue. He sealed the items and made a note. He did not look triumphant or surprised. He looked like a man to whom many things have already happened. When the search concluded, the afternoon had turned the snow a deeper gray, and the windows held nothing but the blur of the storm. The detective thanked me for my cooperation and said they would be in touch. He asked that I remain available. He asked that I do not clean or rearrange anything in the searched rooms. I agreed to both, because that is what an honest person says when the story is trying to dress her in another costume. When they left, the house settled by degrees, the air warmed by a fraction, the silence loosened. I walked to the study and sat at my desk. The notebook lay where I had left it. I opened to a new page and wrote slowly, so that each letter knew it belonged to me. The danger is inside the story now. It is wearing names and carrying evidence. Do not let it write the ending. I closed the book and listened to the wind until it sounded like water, and then like nothing at all. By morning, the storm had buried the road, and the headlines had buried me. A local news site had already found the story. Harris under investigation after suspected poisoning at Alder Hill. My phone rang until I unplugged it. The museum director called twice, voice breaking between loyalty and disbelief. I told him to tell the staff to stay home until further notice. Outside, a single set of tire tracks cut through the snow where the patrol cars had left. The hill had never looked so small. At 10, the detective returned. He was polite, even kind, but his politeness carried the weight of procedure. He asked me to come downtown to clarify a few things. "You're not under arrest," he said, "but it's best we hear it in your own words." I dressed carefully. Gray wool, clean gloves, no perfume. In a small room that smelled of dust and coffee, I gave my statement again, every word I had said before, only slower. The questions circled tighter each time. Did I often handle toxic substances at the museum? Yes. Sometimes certain preservation chemicals. Had I recently purchased any compounds containing cyanide? No. Would anyone else have access to such materials? Only staff, and all under supervision. The detective nodded, made notes, asked again about my relationship with Evan and with Adriana. I described them both as best I could without turning the description into an accusation. He listened, pen still, then closed the file. "We'll confirm the lab results," he said. "For now, you're free to go. Please remain reachable." Outside, cameras waited like birds on a wire. Flashes bloomed. I walked through them as through rain. A reporter shouted my name. Another shouted poison. I kept my eyes forward. When I reached my car, my hands shook so badly I had to sit before starting the engine. The house felt unfamiliar when I returned, as though it were someone else's memory of my home. The evidence stickers on the cabinets glared like small yellow eyes. I made tea out of habit, then poured it down the sink, untouched. At dusk, the phone rang again. I almost let it die in the cradle, but the number was local. "Mrs. Harvey," the voice said, rough but steady. "Name's Graham Ellison. I'm an attorney. Harold Vance, old friend of your late husband, told me you might need counsel before things get worse." I remembered Harold, the retired detective who had once helped Arthur secure museum insurance after a theft. I agreed to meet. 2 hours later, Graham sat across from me in the dim library, coat still damp from snow. He was in his 50s, with the eyes of someone who sees lies for a living but never enjoys it. "They found a vial upstairs," I began. He nodded. "And handwriting that looks like yours." "It isn't." "I believe you," he said, "but belief isn't evidence. The lab will test for trace residues, and if they match the compound in Adriana's blood." He left the sentence open. I stared at the painting above the fireplace, Arthur's self-portrait, the brushstrokes fading at the edges where time had begun to win. "Someone wants me blamed," I said. "They left that bottle where the police would find it. Evan knew which cabinet was mine. He used to hide cigars there as a boy." Graham wrote something in his notebook. "If your son's involved, we tread carefully. You can't accuse family without proof." "I'm not accusing," I said. "I'm remembering." He looked up. "Then let's start collecting our own memories before they rewrite them for us." He arranged for private testing of the coffee residue I'd saved in the linen. He contacted Harold Vance to review the case file once it became public record. Before leaving, He pressed a card into my hand. Call if they move to charge you, and try not to be alone more than you have to. After he left, I stood by the window and watched the road vanish into snow. The sky had turned the color of ash. Somewhere below, a car engine idled too long before fading away. I thought of Evan at the hospital, sitting beside the woman who was supposed to be dying, telling her perhaps that his mother had finally ruined them both. I locked every door in the house, one by one. In the study, I opened the safe and looked at the envelope from Boulder Chemical Supply. It lay where I had placed it days ago, a ghostly proof that someone else in this story handled poison long before I was meant to. I wrote a single line in my notebook before turning out the lamp. When they come for the collector, remember, the collection fights back. They came for me at night. It wasn't violent, not even loud, just 2 officers at the door, the younger one holding a folder against his chest, as if it might warm him. The detective from before stood behind them, his breath rising in clouds. He looked apologetic, and that somehow made it worse. "Mrs. Harvey," he said, "I'm afraid we have a warrant for your arrest. You're being charged with attempted murder." The words fell with the precision of snowflakes. No drama, no echo, only finality. I nodded once, reached for my coat, and asked if I could bring my notebook. They allowed it. The younger officer read me my rights while I locked the door. The house stayed silent behind me, its windows glowing faintly, as if it were watching. The police car smelled of wet wool and coffee. The road down Alder Hill was slick. The headlights carved pale corridors through the trees. I watched them blur past and wondered how long it would take before the story hardened in people's minds. By the time we reached town, the snow had turned to rain. At the station, they took my fingerprints and my photograph. The flash was harsh, a small explosion of white that left afterimages on my eyelids. The detective apologized again, quietly. "Procedure," he said. "You know how it is." I said I did. Arthur had once worked with police on an art theft investigation. I knew the tone of men who wished to sound humane while following orders. The holding cell was small, its walls the color of cigarette paper. The metal bench was too cold to sit on, so I stood. Time there was measured by the buzz of lights and the distant slam of doors. Every few minutes, someone coughed. Every half hour, footsteps passed. When they finally brought in another woman, she looked at me and laughed softly. "You don't belong here." "I suppose everyone says that," I replied. "Maybe," she said, settling onto the bench. "But you actually look like you don't." Her name was Maribel Ortiz, 50-something, wiry, a face carved from patience. She told me she used to work as a private investigator until a client decided to blame her for the evidence she'd found. Occupational irony, she called it. She had been inside just long enough to know the rhythms of confinement, the hierarchy of who spoke first and who listened. She asked my story only once. I told her as little as I could. A dinner, a cup, a hospital bed, a son who wouldn't meet my eyes. She nodded slowly. "If someone wanted to frame you, they started early. You think it's that simple?" "It never is," she said. "But simple motives wear complicated clothes. Greed, resentment, fear, same family, different faces. You'll want to remember that." Her voice had a dry warmth that steadied me. She pointed to my notebook. "Write everything you remember, not just the big pieces. The small ones matter most. The smell, the words, the sequence. Lies trip over details." So I wrote. I filled page after page with the ordinary and the strange. The way Adriana's perfume lingered on the silver thermos, the shape of the footprint outside the window, the almond sweetness that clung to the air, even after I scrubbed the cups. I wrote about Evan's trembling hands and the envelope I had locked away. When I stopped, Maribel was watching me. "You'll need someone on the outside," she said. "People who believe you before the news tells them not to." "I have a lawyer," I said, "and an old friend of Arthur's, a retired officer." She smiled. "Good. The truth doesn't walk by itself. It needs escorts." Later, they moved me to a small interview room. The detective sat opposite, file open, pen ready. "We have handwriting analysis," he said. "The note found with the vial matches samples from your museum paperwork." "Handwriting is easy to mimic," I said. He shrugged. "So is motive." "What do you think my motive is?" He didn't answer directly. "The victim's condition has improved. She's speaking." She claims you were angry about your son's new marriage, that you resented her influence. She says you threatened her earlier that day. That's a lie. He studied me for a moment. She described the cups exactly. She even said you insisted on switching them for luck. Why would she know that detail? Because she planned it, I said quietly. And it went wrong, he sighed. You're educated, Mrs. Harvey. You know how juries hear that kind of defense. I also know how they hear the word cyanide, I replied. For a long time he said nothing. Then he closed the file. You'll be held until bail is arranged. Your lawyer's been notified. They led me back to the cell. Maribel was half asleep, her arms folded. She opened one eye. You look like someone who just realized the walls aren't the only kind of prison. Maybe they're the easiest to see, I said. She laughed softly. You'll be fine. I can tell. You've still got that calm that scares people. That night, I lay on the narrow cot, listening to the hum of lights and the rain against the barred window. I thought of Alder Hill, of the snow covering the footprints, of the fire I hadn't banked, still smoldering in the hearth. Somewhere in the city, Evan was probably holding Adriana's hand, telling her to be strong, promising that everything would be handled. I wondered if he believed his own words. I wondered if he had written the ones found upstairs. Before sleep came, I whispered a line to the dark, a promise to myself. If they turned my house into a crime scene, I will turn their lies into evidence. The rain answered by softening against the glass, as if it approved. Bail came 3 days later. Graham arrived with papers already signed and a look that carried both victory and warning. They agreed to release you under supervision, he said, but they'll watch every step you take until the lab results come back. Keep your phone on. Don't leave the county. Don't speak to your son. The last instruction was the one that hurt. He drove me home through gray drizzle. The trees along the road looked like lines of black ink bleeding into paper. Neither of us spoke until the house appeared at the top of the hill, its windows shuttered, its roof crusted with melting snow. For a moment, I thought of how it must look from the outside fortress. Crime scene, mausoleum. When we reached the porch, Graham turned off the engine. Harold Vance has been digging into your daughter-in-law's records, he said. He thinks the name Adriana Vale doesn't check out anywhere before 2 years ago. No social security trace, no tax filings. If it's a stage name, she's been wearing it for a long play. I nodded slowly. He always did like puzzles. Good thing too, Graham said, because you're the puzzle everyone wants to solve. Inside, the air was colder than I remembered. They had left every light off and every drawer open, as if order itself were evidence. I walked through the rooms in silence, letting my fingers trail the walls until I reached the study. The safe was untouched. I pressed my thumb to the lock, and the green light blinked obediently. The envelope lay where it had always been, flat, pale, waiting. Keep that hidden, Graham said behind me. If the analysis shows the same compound, we'll need chain of custody proof. Until then, it's our only quiet card. He left soon after, promising to return when Harold had more to share. I locked the door and sat down in the dark. Evening crept in, the kind that turns reflection into accusation. I made tea, poured it untouched, then switched on the small television in the corner of the library. The news anchor's voice was smooth and heavy, full of pity that sold well on camera. Sources close to the investigation say the poison may have been prepared days in advance. Police discovered notes indicating a detailed knowledge of lethal dosages. When reached for comment, the Harvey family declined. The screen changed to a photo of me, smiling politely beside a glass case. Beneath it, the headline, "Collector or Killer?" I turned the set off and sat very still. The ticking of the clock felt louder than my pulse. By the time the knock came, I almost expected it. It was Harold, older now, shoulders stooped, but eyes still sharp under his rain hat. "You look like you've been listening to ghosts," he said. "I'm hosting them," I answered, and let him in. He settled at the kitchen table, the same one where Adriana had sat days ago. He unfolded a folder, the paper damp from his coat. "You were right about her," he said. "The name's fake. She's really Veronica Lorne. Used to work high-end cons in Milan jewelry, investments, rich widowers. Disappeared after a death investigation involving an art dealer, never convicted. She reinvented herself here, changed accents like coats." He slid a photograph across the table. A younger Veronica, shorter hair, darker eyes, smiling beside a man I didn't know. There was charm even in the grain of the image. "And Evan?" I asked. "Your son's deeper in debt than he told you. $500,000 at least. Mostly gambling, some failed construction loans. If Veronica knew, she'd see opportunity. She's smart enough to read a will. You changed yours last year, didn't you?" "Yes," I said. "The foundation inherits everything. He gets nothing until after my death, and even then, only through the trust." Harold leaned back. "Then killing you would have been useless unless the plan was to make it look like suicide or incapacity. If they could get you declared unfit, he'd regain control as your legal guardian, nice and clean. No crime scenes, just a sad old woman losing her mind." The words sat between us, heavy and precise. "I always thought love made people stupid," Harold said softly. "But money outdoes it every time." I stared at the photograph again. Veronica's smile seemed to widen the longer I looked. "She didn't do it alone," I said. "She couldn't have known about the cups or where to find the chemicals upstairs." Harold nodded. "That's what worries me." He packed the file away, promising to send copies to Graham. Before he left, he paused at the doorway. "If you hear from your son, don't answer. If she contacts you, record everything. These people don't stop when plans fail. They adjust." After he drove off, the house felt thinner. The wind had picked up, rattling the shutters. I turned on a single lamp in the study and opened my notebook. Adriana Vale equals Veronica Lorne. Debt, diagrams, guardianship, trust. Each word looked like a stepping stone across a frozen river. The phone rang once, twice. Unknown number. I hesitated, then picked up. A breath, soft and measured, then a woman's voice. "Mrs. Harvey, I hope you're feeling better. Evan worries so much. He says you haven't been yourself." "Who is this?" "Someone who still believes families can forgive," she said. "We should talk again somewhere quieter." The line went dead. I sat in the dark for a long time, the receiver still in my hand, the wind pressing at the windows like a visitor waiting to be let in. When I finally put the phone down, I whispered to the empty room, "I forgive nothing." Then I turned the page and began a new list, one of names, times, and places to watch. The next morning began in half-light. A cold fog pressed against the windows until the house looked submerged under water. I brewed tea and sat at the desk, waiting for the day to decide what shape it wanted. The notebook lay open where I had left it. Between the lines, I could see the outline of another woman's life forming, a life stitched together from false names and unfinished crimes. At 9, Harold called. His voice carried the rustle of paper and rain. "We traced Veronica's travel history," he said. "Milan, Zurich, Vancouver, then Denver. Each time she arrived, someone older and richer vanished or rewrote a will. She's a ghost who leaves signatures instead of footprints." "How did she find Evan?" "Probably through the architectural firm he tried to start. She invested a small amount, just enough to make him think she believed in him. Then she made sure his debts grew where she could see them. So, she needed him," I said. "For access," Harold replied. "To your name, to Alder Hill, to the kind of legacy that looks indestructible until you tap it once and hear the hollow echo." I thanked him and promised to stay inside. After we hung up, I walked through the museum wing, past the cases of glass and porcelain. Each object had a history I could verify, a trail of ownership, documents sealed by time. How strange that my own son had become the only artifact in my life without provenance. By noon, Graham arrived carrying a stack of papers. He looked exhausted. "We have the toxicology results," he said. "The compound in Adriana's blood is potassium cyanide, the same compound listed on that invoice from Boulder Chemical. The police haven't seen the invoice yet?" "No," I said. "It's still in the safe." He exhaled, a slow release of tension. "Keep it there. If we can show she or Evan purchased it, it will dismantle the state's timeline. But we need proof of the transaction." "The invoice lists a supplier," I said. "What if we ask Harold to check whether any shipments went to Evan's business address?" Graham smiled faintly. "You're thinking like a lawyer now. Careful, you might replace me." "Someone has to," I said. "If the law believes stories, I'll need a better story." We spent the afternoon building one. Graham called the supplier while I searched my email archives for any correspondence that might link Evan to chemical orders. Nothing obvious appeared. I did, however, find a message from months earlier. Looking for specialized compounds for metal restoration, will send list soon. E. Harvey. It was addressed to the same company. I printed it and handed it to Graham. That's enough for reasonable doubt, he said. For now. As he left, the fog lifted from the trees, revealing the curve of the road below. A single car crawled up the hill, black against the pale snow. My pulse quickened. It stopped short of the gate. Someone stepped out, a woman in a long coat. Even at that distance I knew her walk, the measured sway, the confidence that comes from never expecting to be refused. She stood at the gate, looked toward the house, then turned and disappeared into the woods. I didn't call the police. Instead, I opened the safe and took out the envelope. Inside was the invoice, the smell of paper and chemicals faint but still present. I placed it in a new folder labeled simply Truth. Then I returned to the window and waited until the woods turned quiet again. At dusk, Harold came back carrying a flash drive. "You might want to see this," he said. On my study computer, he opened a series of images, airport security photos, hotel check-ins, surveillance from a bank in Milan. Veronica in different hair colors, different cities, but always the same necklace, a silver locket shaped like a tear. "She kept trophies," Harold said. "People like her always do." He clicked to the last image. It was Evan. He stood outside a pawn shop in Denver, handing a small object to a man in a leather jacket. The object glinted even in the low-resolution frame, the same locket. I felt something tighten inside me, not anger, not even grief, but the cold clarity that comes before a decision. "He's not just her accomplice," I said. "He's her reflection." Harold looked at me carefully. "What are you thinking, Lacey? That they came to finish a story they started somewhere else. But they underestimated how many endings I've already lived through." He hesitated. "If you want justice, we go through official channels. If you want revenge, that's a different map. I just want the truth to walk out of here alive," I said, "whichever path that takes." We began sketching the outline of a trap. Nothing elaborate, nothing cinematic, just a sequence of facts arranged so that greed would step naturally into its own spotlight. Harold suggested feeding them information, something irresistible enough to draw them back. Graham could coordinate with the FBI quietly if we had evidence of a pattern crossing state lines. When Harold left, I stood alone in the library. The clock marked each second with a soft tap. On the desk lay 2 photographs. Veronica's smile frozen in some European summer, and Evan's reflection caught in the pawn shop glass. Between them sat the invoice, pale as bone. I lit a candle beside the papers, a small ritual I learned from Arthur. "Fire makes people honest," he used to say. "It shows what they're made of when they think they can hide." The flame flickered, stretched, then steadied. "Come back to me," I whispered into the quiet. "I'm ready for the next act." Outside, the fog closed in again, erasing the road, the gate, and everything beyond. In that white silence, I began to plan the night that would bring them home. The morning I began the plan, the sky looked deceptively peaceful. The kind of pale blue that makes people forget the storm that came before. I dressed simply dark trousers, gray sweater, hair tied back. The house hummed with that tense stillness that comes before a hunt. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was the one setting the rhythm. Graham called first. "Are you sure you want to bait them?" "I'm sure I want to end this," I said. "We've both seen enough cases where the truth waits too long and dies of boredom." He sighed. "Harold has a contact in the bureau. He can make sure someone's listening when they come for you. We'll need something to draw them out, something they can't ignore." "I already have it," I said. "A story about evidence they think exists." I crafted the rumor carefully, the way you fold poison into perfume. I called an old acquaintance at the local paper, an art dealer who owed me favors and gossip in equal measure. I told him, off record, that I'd found a hard drive hidden in my late husband's archives files that could prove Adriana Vale wasn't who she claimed to be. I let him believe I was speaking in confidence, that the story was too dangerous to print but too juicy to ignore. Within hours, it would ripple through the channels Veronica had used to sell her aliases before. It would reach Evan, because people like him always smell opportunity faster than guilt. Harold arrived before noon with a technician who disguised himself as a repairman. Together they installed micro cameras in the sitting room, the hall, and the entrance to the old cellar door. The feeds streamed directly to a tablet Harold kept in his car down the hill. "They'll think you're alone," he said. "You need to act like you are. Keep your phone on the charger, and don't answer unknown numbers. If anything moves before we get the signal, stall them. We'll be close. Close enough to watch, not close enough to stop it?" He met my eyes. That's how you catch them admitting what they did. When he left, I sat at my desk and tried to breathe. I wrote in my notebook, "Tonight, the house becomes a stage. Every word I say must sound like truth. Every silence must sound like guilt." Afternoon melted into early dusk. The first headline appeared online just after 6. Collector's widow discovers evidence in art fraud investigation. The text was vague but full of implication. I recognized my own phrasing twisted into rumor. Beneath it, anonymous comments speculated about the connection to the poisoning case. By 7, the article had spread to forums that traded in gossip and scandal. By 8, I received my first anonymous message. "You can't hide what's buried. We'll be there soon." I stared at the screen until the cursor stopped blinking. Then I deleted the message and locked every door except one, the back entrance through the conservatory, the one with the broken latch that only someone familiar with the house would know. I left it just slightly ajar. I walked through the rooms, turning off most of the lights, but leaving the study illuminated. The fire glowed low, the papers on my desk arranged with deliberate carelessness. On top sat a black external drive, empty but convincing, its cable coiled like a snake waiting to strike. The wind outside rose again, stirring the trees into restless movement. I moved to the window and watched the last light fade behind the ridge. In the reflection of the glass, I saw my own face pale, calm, and unfamiliar. For a moment I thought of Arthur, of how he used to say that truth was the most dangerous art form because everyone wants to own it. By 9, the first sound came a faint crunch of tires on frozen gravel. I turned off the music and waited. Headlights flickered once through the trees, then vanished as the car parked further down the drive. A door opened, closed, then silence. I didn't move. My hands stayed on the desk, palms flat, eyes on the empty drive. 10 minutes passed, maybe 15. Then footsteps on the porch, cautious, familiar. The door creaked open, exactly as I'd left it. "Mom," Evan's voice called softly. "It's me." I closed my eyes once, steadying my breath, then answered. "You shouldn't be here, Evan." He stepped into the light. His coat was damp, his face pale and drawn. Behind him, another shadow moved Veronica, her beauty sharpened by the cold. She smiled, the kind of smile that only works on people who still believe in it. "We heard what the papers said," she began, "about the files. I thought you might need protection." "Protection?" I repeated, letting the word fall heavy. "That's what you call it now?" Evan raised his hands. "We just want to talk. I know you think terrible things about us, but if there's evidence that someone used her name—" "Sit down," I said. "Both of you." They hesitated, then obeyed. I noticed the tension in Evan's shoulders, the way his gaze darted toward the desk. Veronica's gloved hand brushed his arm, a small gesture of control. "I found something," I said slowly. "A drive in your father's old cabinet. It has emails, contracts, and one photo that doesn't belong there." I opened the drawer, took out a printed image Harold had provided earlier Veronica in Milan, standing beside a man who later vanished. "You told me you'd never been to Europe," I said. Her expression didn't falter, but her pulse flickered at her throat. "That's not me." "Then you have nothing to fear," I said, sliding the photo across the table. "Take a good look." Evan leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Where did you get this?" "From someone who knows what kind of games you've been playing," I said, "and what you did to get into this house." The air thickened. The clock ticked once, twice. Veronica reached into her purse. I stayed very still. "Relax," she said smoothly, pulling out a small flask. "Just brandy, for the nerves." She twisted the cap, took a sip, then offered it to Evan. He hesitated. "You really shouldn't drink that," I said. Her eyes met mine over the rim of the cup. "Old habits, Mrs. Harvey. Some things calm the blood." She smiled again, and in that moment I knew the trap was working. They were both waiting for me to show them where the evidence was hidden. I let the silence stretch, then reached for the drive and placed it gently in the center of the table. "This is what you came for," I said. "But once you open it, You won't be able to close what follows. Evan's hand twitched. Veronica's fingers tightened on the flask. The fire hissed softly, as if whispering to the walls. Down the hill, in the dark, Harold's car waited, its camera blinking red. I met their eyes, one after another, and said the line I had been saving for days. Let's tell the truth together, shall we? The clock struck 10. Somewhere outside, the snow began to fall again, and inside Alder Hill, the snare closed its first invisible loop. The sound of the clock was the only thing that moved between us. Each tick folded the silence tighter, like a rope winding around 3 throats. Evan stared at the black drive, as if it could explain his entire life. Veronica sat perfectly still beside him, that cold composure never cracking, only her gloved fingers betraying a faint tremor as they rested on her knee. Go on, I said softly. You came all this way. Evan's hand hovered above the drive. What's on it? Everything you've been pretending didn't happen. His eyes lifted, searching mine for the old mother who used to smooth his hair when he was a boy. But that woman had vanished the night he brought poison into my home. Veronica leaned forward, voice silky. You're bluffing, Mrs. Harvey. You want to frighten us. But if you had proof, you'd have gone to the police already. I tried that once, I said. They preferred your version, so I decided to give you a chance to write a new one with an audience this time. Her eyes flicked, quick and sharp, toward the window, though she couldn't see the tiny glint of the hidden lens outside. You think you're clever, she murmured. You don't understand what kind of people you're playing with. Oh, I do, I said. Collectors. You collect men, fortunes, names. Evan collects debts and pity. You both collect lies, and tonight you'll sign the receipt. Veronica stood abruptly, the chair scraping. Where is it really? Don't toy with me, old woman. Evan rose too, uncertain now, voice cracking. Mom, just tell us where it is and we'll go. Nobody has to get hurt. That sentence, nobody has to get hurt, was a confession wrapped in cowardice. I folded my arms. You brought poison into my house, Evan. You tried to use it twice. Once in her cup, once in mine. Tell me, which was supposed to kill who? His jaw locked, the mask slipping for the first time. It wasn't supposed to go like that, he said hoarsely. She was the one who... Don't, Veronica snapped. She's twisting you. No, I said. He's remembering. For a heartbeat, the room was filled only with the fire's breathing. Then Veronica moved fast. She reached for the flask again, but this time her hand went lower, beneath it. I saw the glint of metal before Evan did. Stop, I said quietly. You don't want to do that. She pointed the small pistol at me, both hands steady. Give me the drive, Lacey. I didn't move. You've already lost. Her eyes narrowed. Then why are your hands shaking? I smiled. Because I'm tired. The front door burst open before she could reply. The sound was like thunder cracking through the walls. 2 men in tactical coats rushed in, voices clipped. Police, drop the weapon. Veronica froze. The gun trembled, lowered, fell to the carpet with a dull thud. Evan backed away, hands raised, shock written across his face. Harold appeared in the doorway, soaked from snow, his voice calm as a priest's. It's over, Veronica. We got it all. He turned to me. Every word, every gesture. The audio feed caught the confession. The officers cuffed her, reading rights that she didn't bother to hear. She looked at me once, not with rage, but something worse. A smile that said she'd been beaten by someone she underestimated. You're good, Mrs. Harvey, she whispered as they led her out. You should have been the con artist. Evan tried to follow her, but Harold blocked the way. You'll have your turn, son, he said coldly. I sat down, suddenly exhausted. My hands found the cup of tea that had gone cold hours ago. I took a sip anyway. It tasted like dust and relief. Evan sank into the opposite chair. You set us up, he said, voice hollow. I set you free, I answered. From her, from yourself. He laughed a sharp, broken sound. You think this changes anything? They'll still charge me. Yes, I said quietly. But maybe now, you'll finally tell the truth before someone else writes it for you. He stared at the floor, hands trembling. I didn't mean to hurt you. I know, I said, but meaning doesn't erase consequence. Outside, red and blue lights painted the snow. The officers led Veronica into the car. For the first time, she looked small, A woman stripped of her disguises, swallowed by the night she had once commanded. Harold touched my shoulder. You did well, Lacey. It's done. Tuwand. Tensions of cation. No, I said, eyes still on the window. It's only almost done. There's always one truth left hiding under the ashes. He frowned. What truth? I turned to face him. Who bought the first vial? Who sent the coffee? Who made sure the handwriting matched mine? For the first time since I'd known him, Harold hesitated. You think there's someone else? I think there's always someone else, I said. Someone who moves the pieces so the rest of us look guilty. He didn't argue. He just nodded slowly. Then we find them. When the police cars disappeared down the hill, silence crept back through the house. I stood before the fire until the last ember winked out, leaving nothing but the faint smell of smoke and truth. Then I opened my notebook and wrote the line that would begin the final act. If justice is a mirror, someone's hand is still on the glass. The night after the raid tasted like smoke. The house had that hollow quiet it gets when strangers have left, and the walls are still remembering their voices. I slept for an hour at most, the kind of thin sleep that breaks whenever the wind changes its mind. When morning came, the snow on the porch had crusted over, a brittle skin that cracked under my boots. The road below shone like a blade. Graham arrived just after 8 with a thermos of plain coffee and a voice that carried both congratulations and caution. He set his briefcase on the table that had seen too much and leaned closer. They booked Veronica on weapons charges and obstruction, he said. The prosecutors were already building a broader case involving fraud across state lines. There would be interviews, extractions from phones, a deep dive into accounts. My part, for the moment, was to stay still, breathe, answer nothing I did not have to, and let the machine grind the pieces. I asked about Evan. They released him pending further questioning, Graham said carefully. He played the victim in the room, the son misled by a woman with a talent for lies. The recording from last night makes him a participant in intimidation, but not yet a confessed poisoner. They hope he will flip and give them more. I looked at the fire and saw only the ash where it had been. He will not flip, I said. He will bend until he breaks. Graham closed the briefcase. Harold is meeting the bureau team at noon. Sit tight. After he left, the house rearranged itself around the silence he had carried out. I walked the rooms with a museum keeper's attentiveness. The cameras were still in place, but sleeping. The chairs were back under the table. The linen that had smelled of almonds was gone, sealed somewhere down the mountain in a bag, with a chain of signatures attached to it, like a history no one could argue with. I poured the coffee and forced myself to drink half a cup. It tasted like relief trying to remember itself. By mid-morning the phone rang. Unknown number. I let it pass into voicemail. It rang again. I let it go. On the third ring I answered. Mom. The word was small and raw, a child's version of itself. Snow slid off the porch roof with a heavy sigh. I set the cup down. Where are you, Evan? Nearby, he said. I did not do what she did. You have to believe that. You have to talk to them for me. Belief is a door, I said. It opens to something. Tell me what you want me to open it to. There was a long breath. She said you had files that could prove she was lying. She said we could make this go away if you gave them to us. I did not know she brought a gun. I did not know about the poison. You knew about the envelope in my safe, I said. The one from the chemical supplier. You left it on my rug the first day you came. Silence. Then a brittle laugh. I do not know what you think you saw. I saw the label, I said. I read your emails to the company months ago. Metal restoration, you wrote, like a student trying to sound legitimate. Did you buy it in your name? Another breath. When he spoke again, his voice had moved away from pleading. You always make everything sound so simple, like there is one clean truth in a world made of dirty compromise. You changed the will. You changed the locks in every way that matters. What did you think would happen? I did not answer. The wind made a question mark against the windows. He spoke again, softer. I have to see you, please. There are things I cannot say on a line that is not mine. I should have told him no. I should have told him to go to the station and live with the story he had chosen. Instead, I said a sentence in a voice that did not quite sound like me. Come to Alder Hill. Alone. I hung up and stood very still while the house listened. Then I called Harold. He did not like it, but he did not try to undo it. We will stage this carefully, he said. We will not underestimate what a cornered man will do to pretend he is not cornered. Leave the back gate unlatched. Keep to the study. Cameras on. Phone on the table. I will be down the road with 2 cars. I did as he asked. I moved through the rooms and touched nothing I did not need to touch. I turned on a single lamp in the study and let the winter light do the rest. The desk was cleared, except for my notebook and a glass of water with the seal unbroken. The safe in the closet hummed quietly, patient as a heartbeat. At noon, the sky went the color of pewter. At 1, a thin snow began that did not bother with beauty. At 1:30, I heard tires. Not fast, careful. He had learned something at least. Evan stepped inside without knocking. He looked like a man who had not slept or had slept too much. The handsome edges had dulled. Stubble shadowed his jaw. His eyes avoided mine and landed on the camera over the bookcase before sliding away. He was not as careless as he used to be. "You came alone," I said. He nodded and closed the door behind him. For a moment he just stood there, hands at his sides, as if waiting for someone else to tell him what to do. Then he crossed to the chair and sank into it, elbows on knees, head bowed like a penitent who does not believe in forgiveness. "I did not bring poison," he said. "If that is what you are wondering." "You do not have to bring what is already here," I said. He looked up sharply. "You think I am the one who did it. I think the person who benefited most from my death was the one who understood my house and my habits," I said. "I think Veronica knows how to play a part, but she does not know where I keep cups or how I label drawers. I think the vial upstairs did not land in a cabinet by accident. I think you thought you were smarter than time." He smoothed his palms over his trousers, a nervous gesture from childhood that survived everything else. His mouth twitched into an old smile and failed. "You used to say I was the clever one," he said. "I used to say a lot of things I wanted to be true." He looked toward the window. The snow had gathered in the corners of the panes like unspoken words. When he spoke, it was almost gentle. "She told me it would be clean, no pain, no mess. She said it would only take a breath. She said you would finally stop controlling everything and I could start living the life I was supposed to have." He swallowed. Every word tasted like someone else. When the ambulance came, I realized I had misunderstood which life would end if anything went wrong. "Which life?" I asked. "Mine," he said simply. "If she went down, I would go with her. If you died, I would spend the rest of my time learning how to live with the one fact that would never stop speaking." He reached into his coat slowly, then paused when I did not move. He took out a small plastic bag with a folded receipt inside. "From Boulder Chemical," he said. "In my name, you do not need to pretend you did not know. I panicked after the first visit. I thought if I left something that pointed to you, the police would not look at me long." Then the cup switched, and the story broke its own neck. He set the bag on the table as if it were an offering. My mind tried to make room for the softness that wanted to arrive and could not find a door. "Why tell me now?" I asked. "Because she will not protect me anymore," he said. "Because I cannot stand the sound of my own head. Because when I close my eyes, I see the cup in your hands and the way you looked at me when I said nobody had to get hurt." He lifted his gaze. "I am not asking you to save me. I think that part of our story is over. I am asking you to tell the truth so that whatever happens next lands where it should." The clock in the hall marked the hour as if it were proud of itself. Down the hill, a car door closed softly. Evan did not hear it. I did. "There is a path out," I said. "You speak to Harold and Graham. You give them the purchase records and the messages she sent. You tell them which drawer you used and why. You say my name only when they ask for it and not as a shield. You do not run again." He nodded, like someone being told how to breathe underwater. Then he took a breath that had nothing to do with air. "Do you hate me?" he asked. I looked at my son and tried to find a word that would hold the shape of what I felt. Hate was too hot. Love was too simple. What remained was a cold loyalty to the truth. "I do not hate you," I said. "I will never be your alibi again." He closed his eyes and something shifted in his face. A small surrender that made him look very young and very old in the same second. When he opened them, he stood. "I will go with Harold," he said. He looked around the room as if memorizing it for a test he had already failed. He rested his hand on the chair back, then let it fall. "This house always felt like it belonged to a better version of me." We walked to the door together. At the threshold, he paused as if he wanted to say something else and could not trust the language. He stepped out into the pale snow and pulled his coat tight. Halfway down the path, he turned back with a quick, bright motion that made me think of him at 10 running to show me a prize marble. A voice cut the air before he could speak. Not mine, not his. Do not move. 2 agents stepped from behind the firs, Harold with them, his mouth a hard line. Evan lifted his hands without being asked. He did not look surprised. The cuffs clicked, the snow accepted their weight without complaint. Harold met my eyes and gave the smallest nod. We have him safely, the nod said. Now we will have the rest of the truth. Inside, the study kept its patient order. On the desk, the small plastic bag lay where he had placed it, clear as water, heavy as a stone. I sat and wrote in my notebook until the words stopped shaking. Today my son returned to Alder Hill and left with his hands empty. He told the truth, and it did not save him. Perhaps that is what truth is for, not to save, but to finally stop the drowning. I closed the book and listened to the wind house the trees. The snow kept falling, untroubled by any of our private winters. Night came down in a single breath, the kind that erases color and leaves the mountain in charcoal. I waited in the study with the lamps low until Harold called from the road. We have him booked and calm, he said. Veronica is asking for a deal. If she talks, it will not be kindness. It will be mathematics. Bring me the numbers, I said. At the station, the corridors smelled of disinfectant and fatigue. Graham met me at the door with a look that tried to be neutral and failed. He led me past a row of closed doors to a room with a pane of glass so clean it looked like air. On the other side sat Veronica, hands folded, hair pulled back, elegance reduced to line and angle. A recorder lay on the table, its red eye open. The agent asked the questions quietly, almost tenderly, as if speaking to a child who had broken something beautiful. Veronica's voice did not tremble. She told the story as if it belonged to someone clever that she had once admired. She met Evan at a fundraiser, she said. He was hungry and charming and loud with plans. She put in a small investment to prove she believed. She learned his debts before he admitted them. She reached for his hand and found in it the need she could use. The first message about chemicals was his, not hers. The invoice was his. The vial upstairs was planted the day he came alone to the house, while I was at the museum, using a key he had never returned. The note in my hand was copied from a letter I wrote to a donor years ago, traced and rehearsed until the slant was almost perfect. The dessert wine was a flourish. The coffee was the blade. Why the switch of cups? The agent asked. Because she is not stupid, Veronica said, glancing at the glass as if she knew I was behind it. Because she was a collector before I was a thief. We picked the wrong saint. The agent did not let the smile reach his mouth. Who mixed the compound? Evan, she said simply. I set the table. He set the trap. I presented it. The statement went on, careful as lace. Each knot of detail pulled the pattern tighter. When the recorder finally clicked off, the room exhaled. Veronica leaned back and watched the ceiling as if it might applaud. For a moment, our eyes met through the glass. She lifted her fingers, the pale suggestion of a wave, then let her hand fall. Graham guided me down another hall. In a conference room, the evidence had begun to grow its legs. The purchase record from Boulder appeared on a screen. The email I had printed lay in a clear folder. A still from my own security camera showed Evan's shoulder a day he should not have been inside the house. Harold stood at the end of the table with the patience of bad weather. We are past rumor now, he said. What happens to him? I asked. He talks or he drowns, Harold said. If he tells the rest, he buys himself air. If he does not, the weight is his. I nodded and felt nothing that resembled victory. Somewhere, between the pane of glass and the folder of proof, a quiet part of me had stepped out and not returned. They let me sit with Evan under supervision in a small room made of beige and silence. He wore county gray and the expression of a man who has realized that mirrors are not arguments. He did not look at me at first. I waited. The clock on the wall made a noise like a tiny metronome correcting a student's rhythm. She talked, I said. He closed his eyes and opened them again. Good, he said. Then he looked at me fully for the first time. There was no pleading in it now, no bluff, only a worn sort of acceptance. I am sorry, he said. Not the kind that asks for a door to open, the kind that admits there is a wall. For a while we spoke about facts. He signed the purchase. He mixed the powder with the certainty of someone who had read more than he understood. He hid the vial and the forged note and told himself he was protecting his future. He let her pour the cups because his hands shook. He had believed that once the world reorganized itself in his favor, he would be clean again. "It is odd what people think death will solve," I said. He laughed without sound. "I thought it would make me free from the version of me you did not choose." I looked at the table instead of his face. "I did choose you," I said softly. "I did not choose your story for you." He lifted his cuffed hands slightly, an awkward shrug. "You will be asked to speak at the hearing," the lawyer said. "Say whatever keeps the foundation safe. Say nothing for me." I nodded. When the guard touched his arm, he rose. He paused in the doorway and said the one thing that found its way through the ash. "I wish I had built you a house you wanted to live in." I could have told him I had one. I could have told him I wanted him in it. I said nothing. He walked away, and the room lost its shape for a second before the beige pulled it back into place. Outside the station, the snow had turned to wet. Streetlights smeared themselves across puddles, long strokes of gold that broke when cars passed. Graham held the door for me like an old custom that still mattered. We stood under the awning while the rain found its rhythm. "They will transfer him to county tomorrow," he said. "He will be safer there. Veronica will remain where she is. The charges will multiply. There will be hearings, arguments, a calendar that eats months." "What do you need me to do?" I asked. "Rest," he said. "Let the truth work." Back at Alder Hill, the house breathed in my return and organized itself around me. I lit a fire and watched the first flames try to remember how to be tall. The rooms warmed by degrees. I walked to the gallery and turned on the small lights under the shelves so that the glass birds found their colors again. Their bodies caught the firelight and held it. Even the cracked Delft tile looked almost whole. In the study, I opened the safe and took out the envelope one last time. I held the paper in both hands, not as evidence now, but as artifact. This was the hinge on which the story turned. This was the quiet weight that made all our loud choices tilt. I slid it into a new folder and wrote on the tab with a pen that did not shake. Resolved. When I closed the safe, the house gave a small, satisfied sound, the way wood does when the temperature changes and things fit more tightly into themselves. I sat at the desk and wrote in my notebook until the page was full. Veronica spoke and brought daylight to what we knew in the dark. Evan admitted the part that belonged to him. "The machine will finish what it began. I will not let grief pretend to be love anymore. Love will be the thing that tells the truth gently and then is quiet." The phone buzzed once with a message from Harold. "Transfer at 8. We will be on the road before the town wakes. Go to sleep, Lacey." I tried. I lay down in the small bedroom off the gallery and listened to the house map its familiar creaks. I fell into a sleep that felt like a deep lake without wind. At dawn, a thud woke me. For a moment, I did not know the source. Then the phone lit the room cold blue. A text from Harold. "En route. Slow snow. All well." I breathed and let the message lay where it was. I made tea, stood at the window, watched the pines shrug off their white. 20 minutes later, a second message arrived. "Brief stop outside county. Minor mechanical. Resuming in 5. I wrote a single word in the notebook. Safe. The third message did not come. Instead, the phone rang. A voice I did not know asked my name, then asked me to sit down. I did not sit. The words came like gravel poured on glass. A man attempted to run during transfer. No one fired. He slipped on an unshoveled section of lot and struck his head on a concrete curb. Conscious at first. Unconscious now. Ambulance inbound. We will update you from Mercy General. For a moment, the room emptied of air. I put my hand flat on the desk to remind the world that I was still standing in it. When Harold's number finally appeared, he skipped the preambles he usually respects. He told me the facts again, cleaner this time, stripped of apology. He was already at the hospital. He would call when he had something that was not guesswork. I hung up and listened to the old clock in the hall keep time like it had always intended to survive us. I stared at the fire until it blurred. I made myself write, because it is what I do when the weather moves faster than sense. If he lives, the law will do its work. If he dies, the truth will have to learn how to keep speaking without him. Either way, the story does not belong to me anymore. The phone rang once more. Harold's voice had sand in it. "He is alive," he said. "Concussed, held for observation, under guard. The fall may buy him a different path through the court, but not out of it. He asked for you. I told him no for today." "Thank you," I said. The words tasted like water after smoke. When the line went quiet, I walked the length of the house and opened every curtain. Pale winter light poured in and made the glass birds glow. I pressed my palms to the cold window and watched the hillside give back its shape. "This is what remains," I wrote at last. "A house that does not lie. A room that holds its story without complaint. A woman who will carry what is hers to carry and put down what is not." I closed the notebook and let the silence sit beside me, like an old friend who knows when to speak and when to be simply, mercifully, here. Spring came slowly to Alder Hill, like a careful guest. The snow retreated day by day, leaving the dark ribs of earth exposed, slick, and honest. The pines shook out their green. The road reappeared with its old scars, the gravel bright and forgiving in the new light. I slept again for the first time in months, the kind of sleep that does not ask for permission. News traveled in measured lines. Veronica accepted a deal that was not mercy. The list of charges grew until it sounded like a poem written by a cold god. Fraud, identity theft, extortion, conspiracy, attempted murder. She pled to enough counts to ensure that years would stack, one atop another, until the number itself became a landscape. I read the statement from the court and put it away. I did not need to listen to her speak again, to know I would not find anything new inside the sound. Evan healed, then moved through hearings, in a gray suit that looked like a disguise for a man who had run out of costumes. He did not look for me in the room. I did not sit where he could. He signed the papers that admitted the shape of what he had done. He answered what he could without dragging the dead parts of our lives into public light. His lawyer said the words that try to make a smaller number out of a large loss. The judge was a woman with iron in her posture and a voice that carried plain weather. She spoke clearly about choices and about the arithmetic of harm. When she gave the sentence, the room did not breathe. It did not need to. The law had its air. I walked out into the city, sunlight, and found that soundless place where grief and relief sit at the same table and do not speak. Graham stood beside me with gentleness that did not require touching. He asked if I wanted a car. I told him I wanted my own road. He smiled and let me go. The museum reopened on a Wednesday. We set fresh flowers by the entrance, simple ones, tulips that tilt their heads as if they are listening. The interns dusted the cases until the glass disappeared. The first visitors came slowly, a couple passing through from Denver, 2 college students tracing the captions with their fingers without touching. They looked at the birds and the bowls and the odd little artifacts that have outlived wars and marriages, and the voices that named them. I stood at the threshold and watched strangers borrow meaning and return it improved. A reporter asked for a statement. I gave him the only one I had. "The collection is open. Our hours are posted. Please come when the light is good." He waited for more. I smiled and wished him a good day. Later he wrote a kind piece about resilience that made me sound braver than I felt. I clipped it and tucked it into the back of my notebook, so it could make friends with all the pages that tell a truer, smaller story. The board met that month in the long room where the windows face the ridge. We voted to expand the education wing. We created a program that sends small grants to rural museums with 1 curator and more dust than budget. We named it the Arthur Harvey Fellowship and decided that each recipient should choose a single object from their town to write about as if it were a person. The essays began to arrive by summer. A girl in Gunnison wrote about a cracked butter churn that had kept 3 families alive during a winter of hunger. A boy outside Pueblo wrote about a chipped plate with a blue rim like our cups and how it had made a house feel like a house again after a fire. I read them late at night under the desk lamp and felt the rooms in me unlock. In the gallery I placed a new case near the center. It did not hold glass or gold. It held a single sheet of paper with pencil lines smudged by a child's hand. A house on a hill with a smoke line that wobbled and a big square window filled with light. In the lower corner, a small name in careful letters. Evan, age 9. I stood with the conservator while she adjusted the mounts and the light level until the drawing looked like it had just been pulled from a backpack and smoothed on the table by a pair of small, cold hands. People smiled when they saw it. They tilted their heads, as if to hear what the paper might say, if it had a voice. No plaque told them why it mattered. The title card offered only 2 words: found home. Harold drove up on a Saturday with a pie his wife had baked and a report he did not make me read. He put the folder on the table and tapped it once. "Clean," he said. "You will not have to appear again unless you choose to." I poured coffee that tasted entirely of coffee and nothing else. We ate pie at the kitchen table with the window open. The wind wandered through the room, and the house felt the way it used to feel on quiet mornings when Arthur would hum under his breath and pretend not to be pleased that the day had begun. Later, Harold stood in front of the child's drawing a long time. He nodded as if the paper had just told him a secret, and he agreed to keep it. He asked about Veronica's last hearing. I told him I did not go. He said that was wise. He asked about letters from Evan. I told him there were 2, and that I had read them once, and then put them away because not every truth belongs to the same season. He did not ask to see them. When he left, he clasped my shoulder and said we had done a hard thing without leaving scars where strangers can touch them. I liked the sound of that and kept it. The mountain shifted quietly from late spring into early summer, the way a book turns a page you already knew you were ready for. Tourists returned in little bursts. At closing, we would sometimes find a note on the donation box that said, "Thank you for the quiet," or "My grandmother had a bowl like that," or "I remembered something I did not know I had forgotten." I saved them in a clean envelope, the way other people save photographs. One evening, after the last visitor drifted out and the intern had gone home on the path that smells of pine and warm dust, I walked the length of the museum wing with the lights dimmed. The objects sat in their protective rooms of air and glass. The cases reflected me back in small fractions. I thought of how close we had come to turning this place into a shrine for a story that would have never been true. I placed my hand on the cool surface of a case and watched my breath fog the reflection, then fade. On my desk, the notebook was open to a page I did not remember starting. The first line was already written in my hand. "Forgiveness is the craft of letting a story keep its shape without letting it keep your name." Under it was a list of small tasks for tomorrow. Renew the humidity filters, call the school about the field trip, ask the florist for peonies if the frost holds off. The ordinary can hold a cathedral if you let it. At dusk, I stepped outside with a thin shawl for the chill. The ridge wore a soft blue, and the first star showed early, impatient and kind. Coyotes spoke to one another in the gully, and then fell quiet. The house breathed in and out around me. I imagined the pencil in a child's hand, making the first line that would become a roof. I imagined that same hand years later, reaching for a door he could no longer open. I imagined the hand I have now setting the drawing under glass and letting it be what it is, a beginning that did not predict an end. Before I went back inside, I looked down the hill at the faint silver of the road. Somewhere beyond it was a building with blank windows and a clock that told time with rules. I did not try to see into it. I stood very still until the night made shapes, and then I whispered a small sentence to the air, not for the mountain, but for the part of me that needed to hear it. We are not finished. We are simply moving into better light. I closed the door against the cool and the insects and the old shadows that still visit out of habit. The latch caught with a sound that felt like promise. In the study, the fire waited. In the gallery, the glass birds rested. In the case, the drawing kept its little window bright. I sat, lifted my pen, and let tomorrow write itself toward me. The letter arrived on a Monday wrapped in good manners. Cream paper, careful blue ink. The return address was the county facility, although the hand that wrote the lines did not mention its own walls. I placed the envelope on the desk and went about my morning until the kettle boiled dry. Only then did I sit, open it, and read. He wrote clearly. He did not apologize, as if apology were a rope to pull on. He described a class for inmates who wanted to finish high school. He said the teacher was kind and did not look at anyone with the expression people save for lost causes. He said the class was teaching him to draw again, and that he had made the outline of a house that did not look much like a house, but felt like one when he shaded the window. He did not ask for money. He did not ask me to visit. At the end, he wrote a single line that landed with the weight of a season. I understand that truth is the home I did not build. Keep yours. I folded the letter and slipped it into the pocket at the back of the notebook. Not every piece of paper belongs in a case with light measured in lux and temperature, kept at a number that comforts glass. Some things prefer the company of other paper, quiet and unfinished. I made tea, and stood at the window, and let the words settle along the sill. The days found their rhythm again. Tour groups arrived with a soft shuffle of feet and a chorus of polite questions. Children pressed their noses to the cases and breathed small clouds on the glass before their parents reminded them to step back. I watched one boy lift his hand as though he were about to touch the child's drawing in the central case, then change his mind and press his palm against his own chest instead, as if he wanted to keep the act of touching but give it a better object. The docent told the story of Venetian glass in a voice that made the difficult work sound like a dance. The guard in the back hall fixed a light that had flickered for too long. The museum lives because a dozen small tasks meet in the middle of the day and shake hands. I walked with a school group one afternoon. A girl with a braid down her back kept reappearing at my elbow. She asked, "Who decides which objects deserve a place in a museum?" I told her, the decision is a promise, and that promises are rarely about deserving. She asked if the broken ones are allowed. I told her, broken is a kind of history. She asked if that meant people or artifacts too. I said yes. She smiled and returned to the case with the chipped plate and the blue rim. That evening, I wrote to the first cohort of fellowship recipients. Their essays had told stories of rooms where life had been held together with twine and patience. I invited them to visit Alder Hill in the fall for a week of workshops and quiet. I promised them a room with a view where pine and sky do not steal attention, but return it improved. I promised that we would speak about curation as a form of listening. I ended with a sentence Arthur used to write to new architects: "Build your kindness into the design." Maribel called from a payphone I did not know still existed. She had been released pending appeal in a case where the truth was finally taller than the lie that chased it. Her laugh sounded like a door swinging open on a warm day. She said she had found part-time work with a small firm that investigates forged documents. She said the man who runs it still respects the smell of paper and knows that handwriting is a costume that rarely fits at the shoulders. She said she had kept my notebook advice for her own students. Write the small things first, then let the large ones make sense. I told her, the coffee here tastes like honesty now. She said she would visit when the first yellow leaves appear on the ridge. On a Sunday, I drove down to the city to see the new wing of the art school Arthur once loved. The sky was high and ordinary. In the gallery, I stood before a sculpture by a student who had carved grief into wood so gently that the grain looked like water. When I left, I took the long way home. The road along the river showed me 100 small stones that no one will ever exhibit anywhere and that will outlast us all. I stopped at a diner where the coffee comes in thick ceramic cups that keep the heat as long as patience allows. The waitress wrote my order in pencil and called me dear. When I paid, I left a little extra and a note for her. "Thank you for the good cup." She pinned it near the register with a smile. Summer folded into early autumn. The pines stayed green while the aspens decided to be brave. One morning, the air held that first thin bite that teaches you to carry a scarf. I opened the windows and let the house trade old air for young. In the gallery, the glass birds looked like they were holding their breath for snow. I moved slowly through the rooms and checked the seals on the cases and adjusted the angle of a caption card that had learned a bad habit of leaning. A letter from the foundation arrived confirming the approval of our outreach program to the schools north of the pass. The funding would sponsor buses and lunches and a part-time educator who knows how to ask a question that overcomes shyness. I sat with the board and we chose a name that fit the work without announcing itself too loudly. We called it Open Doors. The logo is a simple rectangle of light. Sometimes the obvious is not lazy. Sometimes it is the precise shape required. News from the courts reduced itself to schedules and signatures. Veronica withdrew her effort to change the terms once she realized that the longer she fought, the more the calendar would flatten her resistance. Evan moved through the system with a kind of quiet that did not ask for closure and did not pretend it had found it. I received a second letter where he described the library at the facility. He said he had learned to bind damaged books and that the act of stitching pages back into a spine is a lesson without a lecture. He included a list of titles they needed most. I asked Graham if I could donate them without turning the act into a headline. he found a way. Sometimes, the best philanthropy is simply a return. There were days when sadness arrived without knocking. I would pick up a piece of paper and feel the weight of the years I did not get to keep as they were. It comes quietly, that kind of sadness, and it leaves the same way if you allow it to pass through without setting the table. On those days, I walked the upper path that curls behind the house. There is a spot where the ridge opens, and the town sits far below, like a map someone folded and unfolded too many times. I stood there and counted the houses and thought of all the dinners taking place inside them, the unremarkable meals that hold families together. Ordinary is a grace I did not value enough. The hill has taught me to bow to it. The foundation hosted its first small evening for the fellowship writers. We set up a projector in the library and read their essays aloud while the shadows of the pines leaned against the windows. A young woman from Alamosa cried when she heard her own words in the voice of a stranger. A man from a town with one stoplight told us that his father never believed museums were for people like them, and that now he would bring him to see a chipped bowl made sacred by attention. We ate bread and fruit and cheese and laughed more than grief should allow. When the night thinned and everyone went to their rooms, I stayed and watched the candle burn down in its glass. Fire still makes people honest. It made me admit that hope had returned as quietly as it had once left. The last warm day before the first snow, a visitor left a small package at the front desk with no name. Inside was a plain white cup with a thin blue rim. It was not expensive. It was not old. It was the twin of something that had almost taken my life. I held it a long time. I turned it to the light. I set it on the kitchen shelf beside the plate with the same blue. When I next poured coffee, I used that cup and sat at the window and watched the hill. I drank slowly until the bottom showed a clean white circle. The taste was only coffee. That was the miracle. It asked nothing of me except attention. Winter returned with quiet authority. The first snow came heavy enough to hush the road and soft enough to make children run outside in coats that did not quite fit. I lit the fire and opened the notebook to a new page. I wrote a sentence that had waited for its moment. A legacy is not what survives you. It is what is more alive because you stayed. I wrote it again on a card and slipped it into the case with the child's drawing. I placed the card behind the title so that only those who leaned close would see it. Secrets are hospitality for those who pay attention. At night the house breathed in that deep way old wood does when the temperature drops. I walked the rooms with a cup between my hands and a patience I did not have last year. The moon made a wide street across the snow. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a siren called and faded. I said a small prayer for every person inside a car that chases trouble and for every person inside a car that tries to outrun it. Before sleep, I stood in the doorway of the gallery and looked at the drawing one last time. The square window glowed in the soft light. The penciled line of smoke leaned into the winter air, as if it wanted to see who would read it next. I did not think of endings. I thought of thresholds. I thought of the way a door can be both a boundary and a welcome, depending on your hand. I turned off the light and let the room keep its stories in the dark, safe and exact. In the morning, I would meet a bus full of fourth graders and show them how to hold a magnifying glass without pressing it to the glass. I would tell them that everything important near a fragile object is a type of breath. I would say that memory is not a courtroom. It is a museum. Then, I would open the door and let them in.